Give a warm welcome to David Chu, the Watcher of the 2000s. Yay, applause.
Thanks, Rose. So, I never thought I'd be at a convention here in Santa Warner. I mean, I go to school here, but... Alright, the suburbs are much nicer, and you guys having your own giant crab man, that just doesn't sell it for me. But that's not what you're here for. About 5 years ago, I created a video where I looked at a bunch of episodes of Courage the Cowardly Dog and how disturbing it was as a child. Or possibly to an extent still. Well, believe it or not, I really like this series. When I got behind the mic and did that first list about how creepy the show could be, it was like so relieving to just talk about it. But I just want people to remember how artsy it is too. It had the potential to be very funny, or the potential to touch us with profound, or at least interesting thematic elements. It's John Dilworth style that got me into people like Guillermo del Toro, probably my favorite director, and someone else who always felt like they were doing this for the art, almost in defiance to what a lot of people in the medium are doing. Like, at their core, they're obviously idealistic people who use dark imagery to show something positive or beautiful. But their works can also be a mirror of the viewer, with a few works ambiguous enough to be interpreted in a nice or awful way. If you're a cynical bastard like I've been many times, you can easily say the dog is just insane, just like the magic is not real in Pan's Labyrinth. I hope you people like Del Toro because I'm going to be making these comparisons throughout this little presentation. Almost no other animated series in this time went so far with the artsiness. Even Ed, Edd n Eddy being a big metaphor for childhood doesn't quite match up. It was odd, but never felt too odd. It scared us because we could take it, and it threw emotions at us because we couldn't. And a lot of times, it wanted to teach us something. So all this being said, Courage the Cowardly Dog was a show from 1999 until the early 2000s that had some fantastic episodes. And it's one of those series that has almost no bad ones, like Cowboy Bebop or Futurama. And I want to talk about my favorite ones right now. Number 10, The King of Flan. This episode's a fun ride. The premise is that one round guy hypnotizes people into buying his flan products so they can all get really fat, and the CEO, who looks like Porky Minch, chases Courage for being able to resist the flan. Well, to an extent. Most of the time, Courage is completely sensible, but I'm sure some of you have tasted some good flan. Ooh, especially Choco Flan that you see in any Mexican supermarket. You'll see how alluring it is. And in this case, even Courage has a gradual shift towards the addiction. And he even ends the episode where Eustace and Muriel were in the middle, corpulent and addicted, even if he had the willpower to make the hypnotic anti-flan video. Between what is a really catchy theme for the porker and a premise that doesn't take itself too seriously, as well as some really fluid animation, this episode is one I like to rewatch. One scene I really like is the part where Courage goes to Dr. Vindaloo, who is always calm and his stereotypical Indian sounding music seems normal, and then suddenly it's a bait and switch and the guy becomes just as crazy as everyone else!
You got the line on some flan, dog? Any flan at all?
On one hand, it seems like this episode is trying to comment on mass consumerism through events like Black Friday and the launches of whatever new thing is coming up like iPhones. And on another, Courage is being chased by a guy rolling as a ball who is crashing through walls, who is stunningly okay with being puked on repeatedly. Okay man, that's fine. Everyone has their thing. Mine is librarian, so I'll avoid too much judgment. Amazingly, this episode does cartoonish fun while also depicting crazy consumerism that I find some element of it I'm gonna enjoy every time I give it a watch.
Buy Fantasy Flan. I'm telling the world.
Number 9, Mission to the Sun. This episode sends the bags to the sun in order to fix it as part of a timeshare offer, and funny enough, it only takes about 30 seconds for the family to be in space. This episode doesn't screw around. It's like the remake of the movie The Crazies, where in the first minute, an infected guy goes to a baseball game with a gun. Also, the premise might sound like the movie Sunshine, but this predates it, though that movie is an actual sci-fi and this is shenanigans in space. Mostly caused by some sort of space parasite. He goes into Muriel's brain and makes weird things happen that don't even make sense but are visually fun to look at, like making her hair disappear or giving her sharp teeth. And a good portion of the episode is the computer trolling Courage by promising to tell him more about the mission, but instead just pulling practical jokes each time. Somehow this computer is a bigger prick than the one that Courage has in his house.
None of you space monkey. Press shift and then enter. I get him with that every time.
I didn't even realize at the time it was making reference to 2001 when they were doing that music for when the sun went out. You know, the one that's like not also Sprach Zarathustra? Do any of you know its name? It goes like da 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 da. If you do, can you shout it out? Blue Danube! Ah yes, the Blue Danube Waltz. But somehow the visual fit the music so well, especially that moment where it matches the music going quiet for just a second. This episode also came with an image of Eustace riding an asteroid. Man, it was very merciful for John Dilworth to not kill him off in this episode, but instead for him to save the day, because he just gets beat up all episode, even though he's not acting like too much of an asshole.
Lousy stinking tube food. Hey, not bad.
And plus that shot of the Bags house on Mars at the end of the episode, it's really quite lovely. This episode doesn't go softball on striking images, physical comedy, or weird artsy-fartsy stuff. Thus, I love it.
Oh, Eustace, you space thing, you.
Number 8, Freaky Fred. Hey, it's one of those episodes that are disturbing. It's also one of my favorite episodes because it's hella creative and has this atmosphere that no other episode in the series has. It's creepy, but also a narrative poem about a weird guy who doesn't really hurt people, but just has a compulsive need to cut people's hair with childlike serenity. Must be why the music in this episode is a music box and singing children at 2 different points. And also besides that fact, the audio and visual dissonance is just unnerving. But the cutting thing makes people not like him. I know it's based off Sweeney Todd mixed with Dr. Seuss, but it's also kind of respectful. Fred's a mostly friendly guy who happens to look like a demonically possessed person that just happens to have urges that he knows are not good. He's got mental problems, but he ain't the Joker. Muriel's kindness actually works here, because the guy in question is not actually a bad guy like it usually is, like when she invited that dandy weevil into her house and that guy started to drink her. And the whole conflict was caused by Eustace accidentally locking the dog with the guy who can't help but cut hair.
You give him to the freak. No! Whoops.
Or on the other hand, you can interpret it as a PG version of a guy who has a compulsive need to kill people. But I don't. It's because Dilworth has this thing he shares with Del Toro, and I think it's pertinent to mention. These guys don't like cynicism despite their grotesque art. It's honestly kind of cheap, even if it can be funny like George Carlin stand-ups, or Invader Zim, or even Rick and Morty, but it's not the stuff you use to teach life lessons to children. I'll get back to this. The episode gives a nice insight and a set of experiences that basically sets the guy off. He's so creepy to the audience, but he has such a quirky way of expressing himself that we don't really dislike him. He's one of the most memorable additions to this show, and the fact that we focused entirely from his perspective was just so odd. Fred, I don't know what the hell you are, but your episode, it's a special experience.
I never more was naughty. Well, maybe not never.
Number 7, Dr. LeQuack, Amnesia Specialist. Alright, in the opposite direction, I also love it when this series goes full silly. The episode plays with all these old cartoon tropes. Muriel loses her memory from getting hit in the head, and forgets Courage, so Courage sends out a call for help that leads to a French duck to come and use amnesia as his theme to rob them. LeQuack is prone to being tricked by Courage and his quick thinking, so this basically makes him like this show's version of Daffy Duck, since he falls for obvious things like the whole thing where Courage pretends to be the welcome mat. Plus the gags here are just comical. It even has the things with the silhouettes when Courage gets back in the house. LeQuack's ways of torturing Muriel are straight out of Looney Tunes, tickling her foot with a feather, using a toy train to pie her face, and using a stinky cheese, which also brings one of my favorite extras, Mr. Mouse, to punch this annoying toothy duck in the face. Like, this guy goes around chasing people to smash their heads in with a mallet. Courage, like, blasts him with a giant fan or, like, blows him up. The editing of this episode is also comedic. There's several cut transitional shots, always cut in a silly way.
Where is the family jewels?
Oh, and I like Eustace's amnesia gag.
Where am I? Who are you? Who am I?
Like, wow, I've never heard abject confusion depicted so well. Makes me sad that no one who does voices in the series does anything after this. The frantic editing of this episode makes it feel so quick. It's such a fun watch.
Wait, you have not seen the last of the Quack.
Except you have. He's not appearing on this list again. Number 6, Cat's Candy. Cats has something special about him, and this is my favorite episode that features him. Normally he's doing something awful for money or just because he's a psychopath, like with the hotel where he feeds people to spiders, or like sinking the submarine full of people, which will somehow make him money. Here, he wants to capture Muriel and figure out how she keeps beating him at a dessert making contest. Spoilers, it's vinegar. He's still as psychotic as usual, but it's so petty. I really like it when Cats acts like a cat. Just randomly, like when he does the cat loaf against Courage in their staring contest, since it's easy to forget he's a cat what with the murder and the Britishness. I also like the scenes where Courage actually attacks the jam with a few things including an egg beater and a club, but it doesn't do anything. I think Courage's screaming battle cry is like the most endearing thing ever. He's afraid, but he's being brave too. But this episode I think deserves this spot because Eustace becomes a huge badass here for some reason. Not only does he subdue the mutant jam that Cat sent that had successfully captured Muriel and Courage using his iconic mask.
Get away from me!
But he goes and he wrestles Cats. I guess if a man wants his dinner, he'll get massively determined. Cat's Candy is the episode where Psycho drags you into his torture dungeon because he doesn't like getting second place, and the guy who always gets killed manages to kick some ass, so at the very least, it's one of the more unique episodes. And since it's entertaining, it's gotta be a good enough reason to put on this list.
Sad, isn't it?
Number 5, The Magical Tree of Nowhere. So, speaking of Eustace being a badass, let's talk about him getting jealous and obsessed with killing a tree. Muriel gets some magic seeds that Courage plants and cares for, or rather a convenient rain cloud comes to care for, and this tree starts granting wishes like a new oven or an earth mover. Eustace gets all pissy and wants to destroy it because it completely overshadows him. The way the tree talks uses Dilworth's signature medium mixing to create this striking image of human lips imposed onto the animated tree. So while Courage builds a giant sandcastle with a moat containing a singing eel, yes this happens, Eustace lays siege to it. And the siege scene has several bait and switch gags.
If you will bend and tell me that you love me.
This scene is just full of awesome slapstick with like the best punching bag in all of animation. Eustace's villainy here reminds me a lot of Del Toro films. You think the mysterious and creepy tree is bad, but no, the worst things lie in the human heart. Like Captain Vidal and the guy who tries to kill Ferris Bueller. It's a theme I like about these guys. And you can say the same about the episode The Hunchback of Nowhere, but it was less creative and significantly more boring as an episode, even though it has one of the funniest gags in the series.
And the only thing uglier than this is this.
Not only this, but the tree teaches Courage about things in your life that are worth suffering for. It almost makes sense of the slapstick and justifies it. Like, after the tree is cut down, we have a scene where Courage goes into a hornet's nest in order to make the cure for Muriel. Courage's loyalty to Muriel is rewarded here. The tree has him suffer for a purpose. Courage does that a lot, but the main theme of the episode seems to be about sacrifice. And plus, that dissonance between the music, the scream, and that beautiful shot. Basically, fight for the stuff that's worth it and you'll face losses along the way, even if you poured love into what you lose, but things will work out. It's one of those great teaching moments in the series. Number 4, Remembrance of Courage's Past. Ah, the original finale. This is the only episode where you actually see flashbacks of Courage's past. Basically, it was so traumatic that something that triggered it again makes him become almost catatonic. Then the story goes and pulls Godfather 2, where the flashback runs concurrently with the present time. And this episode is an emotional roller coaster. This episode shows a really tragic backstory about how Courage became a stray and the regrets he lives with for being unable to save his parents, who were sent out into space by Gerald Robotnik. Why? Science. This series has a weird time drawing the line between humans and giant sentient bipedal animals, but I guess here it's an actual plot point. The art shift between childhood Courage that was drawn by Michael Sporn and the current Courage keeps up the show's reputation for striking visuals. It's a very innocent and Rugrats-esque style in order to depict something that is utterly horrifying. Seeing baby Courage's tongue get ripped off in that art style makes it like 10 times worse. This episode is also extremely intense. Even though you know halfway through that Courage's parents didn't make it and that Courage and his family will, the frantic editing mixed with that alarm sound from the spaceship, it just creates such an anxious mood. The episode is sad, but also ends with hope. Let's go back once more. Cynicism is not compelling on its own. Life has pain, but you can overcome. That's something we want to see, and we know how it will end up. And the fact that we can see it coming and that it's still so sweet is wonderful. To see Muriel pick up that crying stray dog and take him to another loving home. This episode is really beautiful and plucks at those heartstrings if you care even a little bit about this hero. Number 3, The Mask. Some of you might know because my last name is Chu, but I'm Chinese. I want to tell you guys a quick story. It's about the rape of Nanking. This is relevant to Courage the Cowardly Dog, please let me tie it in. My grandfather passed away between my first Courage video and me being here right now. He wasn't within the midst of the violence of the rape of Nanking, but he had to abandon his home as the Japanese army invaded it during World War II. When he left, he had his gardener and maid take care of the house. He was kind of close to them, he couldn't have been older than 7 years old. But when he came back, he saw their dead bodies right on the front lawn. So basically, this guy hated the Japanese. He didn't talk much in his old age, but one of the only times he yelled was "Subugo!" When we were talking about one of those Japanese earthquakes a few years ago. It means not enough of them died. I'm not saying it was right, but I understand why he felt that way. I'm bringing this up to tell I get what Kitty feels about those dogs that ruined her life and extending that hatred to other dogs, even if it's not right. Because Cats is one of the main villains, Courage and the audience are distrustful of felines in this series, at least a little bit. That is just one of many ways that this episode flips this show's premise on itself completely. This episode is some weird looking beast. Like, it's barely fantastical at all besides the fact that the characters are all animals like Zootopia. No horrifying or gigantic monsters. Only the one that exists in Courage's head. The villain is not so much a supervillain as much as what you expect from a sociopathic domestic abuser that distances you from your other loved ones trying to help you. Courage is completely proactive and brave starting from the second act of this episode too. Instead of just taking things as they come, he goes to fix the problem himself because he kinda catches the impression that because Kitty hates him, she'll kill Eustace and Muriel, even though that's not true. It's all in his head because he thinks this is just another episode and that Mad Dog is not even the real main challenge. This impression does prompt him to act incredibly heroic and fearless, even for him. Like, he beats up Mad Dog's henchman off screen. Dilworth must have been like, I want to do something completely different. I know we normally do like dark fantasy or sci-fi, but can we do crime thriller? Do you think we can get away with it? I don't know why John Dilworth sounds like that in my mind. I'm pretty sure he's American. But they made the episode twice as long and much more deliberate in its pace and awesomely daring. And it was creepy too. Even as kids, Mad Dog scared us in a different way. It wasn't like a monster from your nightmares, but more like if your dad got mad and wanted to throw stuff across the room. That can't just be an experience unique to me, can it? And then there's a big theme about being true to yourself, overcoming prejudices, and the point when you lose interest in living life like you used to. That's where Kitty is, and she really wants someone to blame for everything, so she lashes out at Courage, and she makes Eustace and Muriel question themselves too. It's an amusing subplot, and it's really quite sweet. Very rare to see this old couple act like a cute old couple. Also, a lot of people like to mention that the relationship of Kitty and Bunny is a lesbian one, and maybe so, but I consider it kind of irrelevant to the narrative since abusers distance you from any friends, not just the ones you're attracted to. I'm only mentioning it because everyone likes to mention it for some reason. This episode is like a mutant Courage episode, and when you get to the end, through this maze of emotions, it's so great that Kitty, Bunny, Eustace, and Muriel are all happier.
That's okay, Muriel. Nobody's perfect.
I wonder where Courage has run off to.
Who cares?
Number 2, Perfect. Oh, the other finale. Is this cheating? A little bit. But Dilworth threw out his best twice in a row instead of making one big finale, so I'm doing this. Sometimes, you're your own worst enemy. Courage is a hero, not one that struggles with self-doubt that often. He's a reactive one, unless it's the mask. But what will happen if the conflict exists within himself? Basically, because nothing bad is happening, Courage is for some reason having trouble doing simple things. Though as a dog, asking him to paint the chicken coop is a bit on the unreasonable side. Courage's self-doubt gets materialized as a teacher who happens to sound a bit like Muriel. Oh, kind of meaningful actually. the most encouraging and most scathing voice sound the same.
All right, I'll go fetch Eustace, and you tidy up. I want a perfect
This teacher tries to push Courage to do what are rather insane tasks like building the Eiffel Tower out of toothpicks and glue. And then a good portion of this episode is the nightmares that bring that medium blending I was talking about to an absurd extent. Traditional animation with colored pencil-like colors for a depiction of the Wizard of Oz, claymation for a juggling scene, CGI for the nightmare trumpet, it's all here and it's jarring and striking. It's actually really sad to see self-doubt depicted like this. This is like the fear of his failure before him. In the end, it's a lesson that says, you do you. Perfection is a myth. Basically, when Courage creates that perfect number 6 that's somehow correct yet incorrect, it's a huge middle finger towards certain arbitrary values and a huge plus for you creative people out there especially. You do things your way and that's okay. It's for those freaks out there who are told they have no place. Guess what? You can always find one. In terms of the lesson learned, it's something that's so nice for those weird types of kids who would have been into this series when they were younger. And when it comes to ending this series, it's perfect.
You're beautiful as you are, Courage. With all your imperfections, you can do anything.
Before number 1, I have some honorable mentions. Curse of Shirley. This episode's really funny. Eustace is one of the best punching bags in all of animation, and this episode takes many opportunities to hurt him. The premise is that Shirley the medium curses Eustace after he acts like a huge jerk. This episode loves its dark comedy too. There's a guy being eaten by a monster and all Eustace has to do is buy a stamp to send a letter to the fiancé. But nope! He doesn't even do that. But then, this episode drops a huge emotional bomb at the end, with Eustace seeing himself as the crying child, and he actually commits an act of kindness, even though he had spent the whole episode being pissed off and blaming people. It was so good to see his human side, when that insecurity went from the subtext right to the text. The thing that prevents this from making the list is that it's undone about 10 seconds later for a gag, at the exact point where the gags should have stopped. My other honorable mention, Last of the Star Makers. This episode is emotionally manipulative, but the first minute is so beautiful that without using a single word, you establish that there's just space squids that create stars, these space squids love each other and have a family, and when a giant space whale tries to eat them, the father sacrifices himself to destroy it. It's like a mini version of the opening of Up, except, completely different. I find myself attached to this episode because around the same time when I first saw it, there was this Animal Planet thing I watched, The Most Extreme, and there was an episode about animal mothers, and the octopus is there. And basically, they're extremely caring mothers who devote months to protect their eggs and will die after the eggs hatch. When I saw this is what I thought was being depicted. I can't believe I'm saying this, but this episode is about the cycle of life. They didn't use an octopus because those are actually hard to draw in this art style to look cute. But once we get to the plot, this is where problems start coming up. Eustace calls the government to test things on the mother. It's just here to be a conflict, and I was hoping for symbolism, but it's just flimsy. It's like, wow, that's something really beautiful, let's defile it. This episode loses a lot of steam because it can't keep up with this first half. Even though this is one of the sweetest episodes, it's just the second half is really underwhelming compared to the first half. It still has funny moments.
That look odd to you.
Nope.
But what is this thing about the mother squid turning into a garden? Is it just for pretty imagery? But yeah, I applaud the episode for starting off so strong, but I wish that momentum kept going. This could have been the best episode. 2 is enough. Let's go to 1. Number 1? It's the Tower of Dr. Jalost. Yeah, I chose this episode as my favorite. A part of me is a contrarian that likes to make odd choices for number 1 that pisses people off, and the other part of me says, this is the best episode and it would be dishonest for me to deny it. It's just so ambitious, and the effort they put into the soundtrack is really praiseworthy. The plot of this episode is that this green dude, Dr. Jalost, has cannonballs that don't destroy anything, but just makes whoever it hits depressed. He does this to the town of nowhere that for some reason has over $33 billion in its treasury, hoping that the money would make him happy. While this is happening, we're introduced to Muriel's plums that make people happy. And I just realized this can be interpreted like that Futurama episode where Bender added LSD to his food in a cooking competition. I'm just saying that maybe Muriel might cheat during her contest and that maybe vinegar is code for some sort of hallucinogen. But Dr. Jalost is basically like the embodiment of despair and that rage that comes with it. But he also wants to be happy. He tries to watch TV and eating ice cream and asking his rat employee Rat to give him a hug. It doesn't work. It's like trying to sleep with a prostitute and wishing you'll feel loved, like Chris Farley. Poor guy. But at least I got Rose. In the second act, he infects Muriel with the SADS. It doesn't work on Eustace, amusingly. So Courage explores his lair, and his lair is one of the best uses of CG in this series besides King Ramses. The way this tower moves, it's like an abomination. Here, Courage faces a bunch of trials in the tower, almost like a video game. One of them is Rat in a really big room of cannonballs, and for some reason it turns Rat into a monster. Courage gives Rat some happy plums and it makes Rat into a crying baby. I swear I didn't skip over anything there. As you may be able to tell, this episode doesn't take itself too seriously. I mean, Courage dodges the cannonballs with, like, the gag glasses and nose. And I really like what is one of the funniest scenes in the series, the hangman scene. Jalos has an obvious riddle, but he charges $5 for vowels. What's with this guy?
Would you like to buy a vowel? Only $5 each? No. Want to buy another? Oh, yeah. That's 5 for the A and 10 for the 2 O's. That makes 15. What's the problem? Will you shut up?
And yet, thanks to the score, it seems like it's a really intense scene. The plot does get resolved by Muriel's LSD plums, both for the villain and curing everyone. And he even hugs Rat. And this episode has my favorite reaction to anything that Eustace ever gives.
It's the end of the world!
This episode's just so well produced, so much effort went into making like a sympathetic villain and a story with lots of twists and turns. Like The Mask, Courage is actually brave here, but here he like saves a whole town and he doesn't like clobber the villain to do so. This episode makes me appreciate a lot of storytelling elements I love today, like these recurring musical motifs and like this heroism that's not rooted in anger and the humor in these dire situations. And there's another thing about this episode besides the music and comedy that makes me want to pick this. It's this idea of happiness that I kind of relate strongly to. Well, it's just, when you're unhappy, you think the world is out to get you. You think that no one's been where you are. So, sometimes you go a little crazy. You want the world to understand just a little bit. You lash out, you push everyone away who cares about you. If they don't leave, they don't really enjoy being around you. You're left with material things, hoping they'll feel what you've lost. I could tell you about every episode of Courage or Futurama or Invader Zim or Ed and Eddie. Some I could quote the entire episode and we'd have some laughs. I could tell you how many times I've binge-watched a series. I could tell you about the many ways I interpret Courage and his caretakers as well as the monsters he keeps running into. But they don't fill that emptiness. They're not my family. They're not my friends. I can't tell Ed about what my brother did that pissed me off. I can't ask Batman if he prefers noodles or rice and why. I can't hold Courage the Cowardly Dog in my arms, pet him, and feed him bacon or whatever it is a dog eats. I've never had one. Sometimes I feel like I could use some happy plums. But there are no happy plums, are there? If you're suffering, you have to pay for it, whether you feel you deserve it or not. I can't act like none of it happened. Even if you find that spark to start living again, you have to rebuild everything yourself. I guess what I'm saying is to not live in a delusion. Just don't do what I'm doing right now. It was my fault. I never should have tried to run away from it. It's been 5 years, and there's not been a way out of this. But it's been long enough.
Leave if you want. I'm only here to watch your behavior.
Was this really all just to help me get over this? You're not even the real thing, are you?
You're still just a stupid child. But there's still time to grow up.
If you're not a figment of my imagination, and you really did this for me, maybe you're not all bad.
Kitty, kitty, meow, meow. I will bring the cat chow.